Throughout history, certain events have shaped our world in ways that go far beyond their immediate impact. November 22nd, 1963. September 11th, 2001. March 2020. Each moment marked not just by tragedy, but by the questions that followed. The Warren Commission, the 9/11 Commission, emergency powers that became permanent. From Dallas to New York to global lockdowns, patterns emerge for those willing to look. The same institutions, the same responses, the same consolidation of power. Recent events continue this trajectory. Butler, Pennsylvania, Manhattan's streets, each incident followed by familiar narratives, familiar solutions. Meanwhile, in boardrooms from Davos to Bilderberg, the world's most powerful gather behind closed doors. Central banks coordinate policy. Intelligence agencies share resources. Global forums set agendas that nations follow. The World Economic Forum speaks of stakeholder capitalism. The Bilderberg Group meets in secrecy. Ancient orders maintain their influence. Some call it conspiracy, others call it coordination. But the connections are there, documented and undeniable. The question isn't whether these networks exist, it's whether we're brave enough to acknowledge their influence on the world we inhabit. The dots are there. We just have to be willing to connect them.
What if everything we've been told about how the world works is a lie? All right, welcome in everybody. I want to thank all of the people that have supported me in trying to get my own thing going on here. And so I wanted to, first of all, thank the people from the true crime community. Some of you may recognize me from the Devil's Advocate show. And I've been on a couple of other shows as well. So I want to thank DA, Captain 11, Robin, Dago from the True Crime Cafe. I want to give a shout out also to Birdie Bombshells and the Custody Queens Off the Clock with Ron. Thank you guys. I appreciate your support. And so let's get into it. Why am I doing this? Well, the reason why I have decided, or had decided a long time ago, that I was going to start my own channel is because over time, over many years, I started to really pay attention to things that were happening in the world and the way that society was responding to the things that happen in the world. Now, my educational background is in psychology, so I tend to frame things with that sort of thing in mind. I tend to look at things, particularly on a larger scale, through the psychology lens, because everything that deals with people is essentially, it's psychology, right? It deals with psychology. So I look at everything in some way, shape, or form through that lens. So when I talk about different topics, which I'll get into some of the things that I'm going to be talking about as we go, but the bigger picture, sort of the bigger purpose and mission that I have, is to try to get people to connect the dots, to sort of zoom out and look at the big picture and see how everything, every small thing is connected to bigger things, and to frame the way that they look at the world through that lens. You know, utilize pattern recognition, see patterns that repeat over time, and you start to recognize them. And so the idea is to get people to discuss these bigger ideas, because I don't think you can address the many, many smaller ideas unless you look at the big picture. So a couple of main overarching themes that you'll see with the State of the Deep channel is look at the big picture of how the power structure, I call it that, some people call it the elites, some people say the matrix, but look at how they manipulate both populations, resources, They utilize control within governments, within the corporate structure to forward certain much larger agendas. And to look at that stuff, you have to look at the global power structure and how it has always functioned for centuries, right? You talk about just for some examples, you look at like secret societies that go back for centuries. You look at how those secret societies evolved and in many cases merged with other power factions over time. And you see it, if you look at the history, you'll see that theme and that pattern plays out all throughout history. So I'm going to look at things like just for a few examples. I took some notes so I could at least make sure I hit on certain key things. Um, Look at how human nature is manipulated by the power structure, right? Because even though we've evolved, humans have evolved over many years, humans haven't evolved that much, right? So if you like, for example, we still have tribalism, fear, greed. There's still pathologies like sociopathy and narcissism. And you might even argue that some of those things have played an evolutionary role in the survival of the human species. But a question that I ask, and I'd like to get people's sort of feedback in the comments. And by the way, please like and subscribe to the channel. It'll help me out greatly. And keep in mind, everything that I say is just my opinion. And all the things that I speak about are obviously, as they say, alleged. Okay. So has society and geopolitics evolved in a way that benefits humans? Right? Has the way that society and larger structures evolved outgrown humanity? Right. And that leads me to some other key points that we're going to get into. And I will talk much more about this stuff in the future. In future episodes, I'll talk about either current events, things that are happening, and my sort of big picture view of them and what I think is really going on. But I'll also discuss like particular subjects like the power elites, the global power structure, intelligence agencies, um, the economic system and the global banking system, central banks, things like that, and how they actually tie into everything else, right? Because in my opinion, it doesn't matter if you can't tie them into other aspects of everyday life. So let's just ask a few questions to start. How did we get here? Right? Let's look at the state of the world and ask that question. And I want to zoom into, let's just say, I'll just use the last 6 years as an example, right? I won't go into tremendous detail in this video about that stuff, but let's look at it and kind of zoom in on it a little bit. Now, the way that I look at the last 6 years is we see a major global event that happened in spring of 2020. And then from that, we see what I view, in my opinion, is a power and a money grab. So a global sort of phenomenon of consolidating power and transferring wealth, right? I believe certainly up to that point, it was the largest wealth transfer in history. So let's look at how that has sort of evolved over the last 6 years to where we are today. We have seen this merging more than ever in the last 6 years, this merging of government and large corporate entities in this particular case, the big tech world, right? You see a lot of companies that started out as intelligence contractors that evolved into their own supposedly independent companies, now partnering with the government, such as, like, with Larry Ellison's company, with Oracle, and Peter Thiel and Palantir, and Elon Musk. Elon Musk has numerous companies that have governmental and intelligence contracts, right? So that has been pretty obvious. And with all that, we have seen a major push in this speeding up of this sort of surveillance state. There's been a sprint towards it, it seems. And and so I look at all of that stuff and how it's become really obvious in the last 6 years. That is just one example, but there are many. There are many examples of consolidation of wealth and power that we've all seen, and we'll speak about that stuff more going forward. But let's focus on big tech for a second. If you look at how these companies originated and who was behind, for example, the creation of the internet, ARPANET, right? These were basically intelligence and military industrial complex uh, projects initially, which a lot of technological things typically start out that way. But you see how what we are told things are going to be used for gets distorted over time, and they or abused depending on how you look at it, right? We know about data collection companies like Facebook and Google, and there are many other ones, different social media platforms and all kinds of online platforms that collect data. And now we're getting to the point where how much of that is for business, like marketing and things like that, like people were originally told, and how much of it was really for surveillance, right? So, I mean, Edward Snowden, the things that he revealed, right? That kind of stuff also comes to mind when you think about the abuses of power, right? That have taken place over time. Look back on into, for example, the church committee hearings that occurred, I believe, back in the 60s about government overreach, more specifically, the CIA's overreach. And then different programs started to emerge, like MK Ultra and the Operation Paperclip, and many things. Operation Mockingbird, which was the infiltration of the mainstream media with CIA operatives and the co-opting of mainstream media personalities and organizations by the CIA. So if you look at all of these things and you extrapolate out over time and you see what has happened, and it started long before spring of 2020. I'm just kind of using that as an example to illustrate certain things about how the power structure works. Think about how many things we were told in spring 2020 that it was like you're doing this for the greater good, and it's really for everybody's benefit and you have to come together. And then look at how that was taken advantage of, right? And then over time, the truth reveals itself more, and you start to see a much darker picture emerge, which, again, I'm not going to get into details about right now, but we will in the future. Feel free, comment on this stuff, and give me your feedback on your take on this stuff, and it'll help me shape how I want to present ideas in the future. But think about, all right, so again, spring of 2020, that was really sort of the launch of this idea of surveillance, tracking people. Um, what did we hear a lot about? Supply chain issues, right? So everything went up in price due to so-called supply chain issues, but those prices never came down after they resolved these supposed supply chain issues, right? So they kind of groom the public to accept the inflation, accept less freedom. And is, in my opinion, there has been a very orchestrated whittling away of people's civil liberties that have been pitched as it's a necessity, it's an emergency, we need to do this, right? Enter domestic surveillance, predictive policing, geofencing, DNA database uh, companies being thrust into the public spotlight. People in the true crime community all know exactly what I'm referring to in this particular case. So think about all these things and how have they impacted everyday life and what people will accept as the quote unquote new normal, right? So, I mean, some of the things, just for an example, I'm going to speak about more specifically is what do governments actually do? What is their actual role in the big picture, right? Go back centuries, go way, way, way back. What did governments essentially function as? I would argue, and I think a lot of people would agree, that governments were really just a means to control citizens and to control resources, right? And in my opinion, that has always been done on behalf of a sort of tip of the spear global elite, very, very small group of people with a very, very high concentration of power and wealth. And then if you look at some other very significant things that have evolved over time, I'll just give you one prime example, the CIA, right? They were started in 1947, I believe, and they emerged out of post World War II times when during that time you had the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which was supposed to be just a wartime intelligence gathering agency. After World War II was like the beginnings of the Cold War with Russia, or it was when it really started to ramp up. And so the CIA was created by largely, and you can look into this, Wall Street people. Now, the narrative we've always been told has been it's an intelligence gathering agency to be able to provide intelligence briefings for the president, and that they don't do operations inside of America. It's only outside of our borders, and that they're functioning as a national security type of agency. But if you look at the history and you look at how things have played out, you might say that it's pretty clear that what they have really functioned as is a corporate security force, ultimately, that operates in order to further elite business interests around the world. Now, we also know that they have carried out operations in the United States. So we know that this has happened many times due to different declassified operations and things like that. So it makes you wonder now when you look at history, are the powerful and the proxies of the global elites all of a sudden now doing things differently as opposed to the way they've done things for centuries? So I would argue they're probably doing things the same. And I think there's a lot of evidence to back that up. So, again, some other things I wanted to talk about in general would be how different uh, institutions get co-opted by the power structure, such as the mainstream media, the university system, um, the banking system. And these are all used as, again, control mechanisms and a means to consolidate power and wealth. And I wanted to also discuss a little bit about sort of my take on things and what I want to accomplish. I am not going to be the greatest detailed researcher in the world who gives like the most intensely detailed breakdowns of everything and presents research. I've done my own research. I think everybody should do their own research. I'm just going to be sort of talking about bigger ideas. I can recommend some people like some journalists and authors and even some content creators that I have watched. And while I might not agree with everything that they say, I would say that a lot of what they have to offer is worth considering, even if you don't agree with everything that they say. So, just a few people to mention. Whitney Webb is someone I would give a really high recommendation to. She is the one that wrote the 2-volume book series called One Nation Under Blackmail, and it's about Jeffrey Epstein, and it goes way, way, way back, and it addresses sort of the merging of the government and U.S. intelligence with organized crime and how that evolved over time. And then it just gets into really, really extremely deep detail about Jeffrey Epstein and what has led up to the whole situation with him and the Epstein files and all of that. So I'd highly recommend Whitney Webb. She also breaks down the sort of power elite oligarchy better than anybody. So I would say Whitney Webb. Tom O'Neill is a great author. He wrote the book Chaos, and it was made into a Netflix series. I would recommend that because it does talk about sort of the merging of the intelligence agencies with infiltrating certain social movements back in the 60s. I'd recommend that book. John Perkins is the guy who wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and he wrote many other books like similar, very, very interesting and compelling stuff about his background and the books, the particularly the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that ties into the big picture and the stuff that I'm talking about. So I would recommend that. John Perkins. For journalists like Glenn Greenwald, Matt Taibbi, those are two high quality independent journalists. Mike Benz, Benz. He's a very sharp guy, extremely intelligent, with a vast knowledge of the intelligence agencies and how they function and how certain NGOs are used by the intelligence agencies. And again, I don't agree with everything that anyone says, but I'm just giving you guys a little bit of foundational stuff to check out. And if you really want a funny breakdown of stuff, check out the Tim Dillon. He's a comedian. He has his own podcast. He's you probably know who he is, but nobody on the planet has better rants about politics, corruption, the intelligence agencies, and all of that stuff. No one does it better than Tim Dillon. Watch his interview on CNN, and it will be the most unintended comedy special you've ever seen. So, and then some other books. Each episode I'm gonna try to recommend at least one book or some information for people to check out. I already mentioned a couple of books, but I will tell you a book if you want a real easy read. Like it's a quick read. It's not like a super dense and exhausting book, but It's called The Corporation by Joel Bacon or Bacon. I'm not sure how it's pronounced. It's let me see. I might have it right here. Hold on. I think I have that and a couple of other ones right close by. I don't know if you'll be able to see it, but it's going to be backwards the title, but it's basically the pathological pursuit of profit and power. And this book was great because it's it's not a conspiracy theory book. It's a book about how corporations started and the role that they play in the world and how they go about business and what their real sort of priorities are. So I would recommend that one. There's a ton of books. I have a bunch of books I want to recommend about the intelligence agencies and things like that. And I promise to do that each episode. And so let me just sort of rewind for a second. As I said in the beginning of this video, I'm really more of I'm not a true crime guy per se. I followed some true crime cases over the years, but only because I studied forensic psychology, among other topics. In college, I was a psychology major. And before I decided that I was going to focus on clinical psychology, I studied, social psychology. I studied forensic psychology, abnormal psychology, and a really interesting course was one of the electives I took was called Conflict and Violence, and it was taught by a retired FBI special agent. And that class was really interesting because we got into a variety of topics, including geopolitics and different geopolitical conflicts around the world that had been going on forever. And it opened up discussion for a lot of different things that I think are relevant in the world right now. And so at some point in time, it was a long time ago, it was probably before I went to study or pursue clinical psychology or going to graduate school or anything like that. I read a bunch of John Douglas's books. He was the guy who founded the behavioral, what is it, the Behavioral Assessment Unit. It was basically the profiling division of the FBI. I don't know if I'm getting that name correct off the top of my head, but so I read a bunch of his books, and through that I would follow some true crime cases and really just sort of look at it through the lens of profiling. And then that sort of ties in with, I guess, a lot of how I look at true crime and why I look at it the way that I do. But this channel is not going to be a true crime channel. It's really going to be, I might touch on some true crime cases, but like for example, the big one that's blowing up right now is the Idaho 4 case. So the true crime community has really been on a tear the last 2 weeks since the release of a new book written by a retired FBI special agent and intelligence contractor. The book is called Broken Plea, and it's by Christopher Whitcomb, and he did a round of interviews, and the Devil's Advocate show, which I'm a regular panelist on, was the first channel to interview him. So things have been going really haywire with that case since that book got released, really since that book was announced. And so I will touch on some of that stuff, but generally speaking, it'll only be in the context of a bigger picture. Like, for example, my take on the Luigi Mangione trial and that whole case, the Charlie Kirk assassination, the Idaho 4, Even the Nancy Guthrie case, I have my own take on that stuff, and I tend to believe that higher profile, high impact events that have connection to power and money have a bigger picture, a bigger component to them. And that's the kind of stuff I like to dig into. So I would like to also, before I forget, I wanted to also touch on some of the things. I kind of skipped ahead a little bit because I got on a roll, but I touched on the big tech thing. In my opinion, I think what is happening with the big tech oligarchs and our government and governments around the world right now, I really believe that we are on a downward spiral that's rapidly accelerating to a more of a sort of totalitarian state. Now, we've all heard about, the globalists and globalism and the new world order and all these things. And over time, you might hear these things and go, that's nonsense. And I used to feel the same way. But when I look back over history and you start to learn about things going way, way far back, you see that the power structure has always wanted a totalitarian state. They've always wanted a global government. They've always wanted to have absolute control over people and resources. This is nothing new. And so I feel like to dismiss that it still happens now just because people have supposedly evolved is short-sighted. I think if you look at what are they pushing, think about it. What are these big tech people raving about? Robotics, AI. They seem to cheer the idea of humans being replaced by AI and robots. And all right, maybe you could say that that's just a distraction. They're just whatever. It's just bullshit. They're just trying to distract the public and stir up controversy because they know people will push back on that, and that that's probably part of it. I wouldn't doubt that. But let's look at what they're actually advocating for, right? That's they're talking about Elon Musk talks about universal high income. So the government is going to pay people a high income, and then they're going to replace all of us with robotics and AI. Well, guess what? If it once they get to the point where they can replace humans with AI and robotics, we're done. They're not going to be paying for things that they don't need to have us around. I know that might sound dramatic for some people, but I don't think you become a billionaire because of you're a beneficent person who wants to help humanity. I just don't buy that. I mean, look at specifically the big tech stuff. Let's look at this whole crazy transhumanism. The, I mean, all of these things are a very dystopian sort of framing, at least how I see it. Humans are not meant to be that. Humans are not meant to just be relegated to things you kick to the side, right? I mean, I just am very concerned about the direction of the world, and going back to spring of 2020, I saw patterns, and I don't know why I was able to see them immediately. People told me I was crazy. And then a lot of the things that I predicted played out. And so I'll sort of I'll get more into detail about that stuff going forward. But let me just put this out there and people tell me what you think. I've never been sort of like warm and fuzzy and I love everybody and everybody's amazing. I have a pretty sometimes cynical view of the world, but definitely a realistic view of the world. And so I see the direction that things are going, and I've played it out in my head. Where is this going to lead us if X, Y, and Z happen down the road, right? How is it all going to play out? And we've seen this divide and conquer strategy being used against citizens. We've seen how they use that divide and conquer strategy to quote unquote manufacture consent for policies that really are not in the best interest of citizens. They're largely in the best interest of the power structure. But the way they put people one side versus the other is how they are able to push through a lot of these really problematic policies and forward these really, really nefarious agendas, in my opinion. So, divide and conquer, it's one of the oldest tactics in the book, right? Because a divided population is easier to control, number one. Number two, if people are fighting against each other, they're not fighting against who the real potential enemies are. And so I know that this particular episode is really sort of all over the place, but I wanted to touch on a bunch of different things. I wanted to be able to cover a lot and sort of set the groundwork for the things that I will talk about and how I look at things. So like I said, while I'm not the most woo-woo guy and the most warm and fuzzy guy, I do believe that one of the only things and one of the most effective things that we as a society can do is not buy into the right versus left narratives, not buy into this race versus that race, not buy into these dividing lines the way that we have over the last well, really for decades. Because that stuff, in my opinion, is completely fabricated. And you have these organizations that have some of the smartest psychologists in the world working for them. They know how to manipulate society. They know how to manipulate behaviors. They know how to stir up controversy and even hatred between groups. And that's something else we'll talk about. How are organizations co-opted, right? And how do they become proxies for the power structure? We'll talk about NGOs, a lot of different things. But what I would say is if I can get people to wake up, to really look at the big picture, look at who has benefited from the state of the world, the division, the economic hardship, the social division. I mean, there's so many things. We've all seen it. Who benefits from that? Citizens don't benefit. What that does is it serves to weaken society and give more power to the elites. So I would say, as cheesy as it sounds, I believe that the only hope, or at least in my opinion, the one that has to come first, is if people wake up and realize that most of the division that we have seen in the world has been manufactured, and that while we're not all going to agree on everything, we can come together and realize more than anything else, it's really citizens versus the elite, powerful sort of oligarchy that exists in the world. I used to hear people all the time. You'd hear like, this is a spiritual war. And you would hear this kind of floating around in social media, and you would see it in chat rooms and things like that. It's a spiritual war. And I used to kind of dismiss that and look at it through more of a sort of psychological lens. But more and more, I am starting to agree. I think if you keep people scared, confused, divided, they they're not functioning at a high energy level, at a high spiritual level, whether you talk about religion or whatever you believe. And I think that that is bigger than all of us. I think that bigger picture, that's about as big as you can get. You can't zoom out, in my opinion, any further than that. And I think that people trying to unite and waking up is the first step, because we're not going to be able to push back on any of the things that are happening right now that are coming down the pike as well, with society and the world so divided. There's no chance. There's no way we can overcome this stuff without people uniting on some level. And so that's a big part of what I believe and why I wanted to create this channel. Now, I'm not a, you know, professional content creator. I have no interest in being an influencer. I'm sure I'm going to be a little rough at first, and I have to develop my streaming skills. And in the future, I'll be adding more in the way of, media and then clips and things like that. But for today, I just want to say thank you for listening. I wanted to again thank everybody that supported me to get this channel going. It's been a long time coming. And I really want to invite people to try and look at things differently. Try to change some of the ways that you might look at certain things that you might even be really emotionally invested in. And we can go through a lot of this stuff together going forward. I want people to comment. I want people to get engaged. I want people to debate, you know, uh, in a productive way, and share different ideas. But I don't want to see people get duped by this big picture stuff that's going on. Zoom out, connect the dots, weed through a lot of the BS that is used as distractions. And I definitely, in the next episode, which should come out within the next week, I want to get into a little bit more specifics on the state of the world right now, without getting into like specific detail about politics or anything, because I think politics is nonsense that's just used to divide people, in my opinion. So yeah, I definitely think it's a tool for division. So again, please like and subscribe. I promise I'll get better at this as I go forward, and I look forward to interacting with people, and hopefully we'll get to dig deeper into certain things that I believe are not acknowledged as much as they should be, certainly not in the mainstream, and start to figure things out, because I think it's a natural human process to reject ideas that you don't fully understand. And sometimes something that sounds really crazy, when you start to dig into it and see more details about it, they suddenly don't seem so crazy. And there's an endless list of things that I've seen that fall into this category that I thought there's no way that could be really going on. Like, for example, many years ago, I would see the term MK Ultra on like message boards and stuff, and I had no idea what that was. And then when I started reading about it, it's like that's crazy. There's no way that was going on, but it was, right? And so a lot of things that sound too crazy to be real often end up being proven to be very real. And so we have to be willing to address ideas that we might think are absolutely crazy at first. And so, hopefully we can do that much more in the near future. And I'll give you guys some more book recommendations, and we'll talk about some of the topics in much more detail than others. If I feel like I can add something to that topic, but go out, find some, different independent researchers, dig into their content a little bit. Like, so it's a topic that I've been learning more about recently that I only had a cursory knowledge of in the past was like secret societies. And as you start learning about them, you see they go back a long way, and they have always functioned as a means to consolidate power in smaller groups that have a sort of secret existence to many people. They over time they didn't even know about these organizations till much later in time. So we'll dig into all of that kind of stuff. Tell me some topics you guys might want to talk about, and if I think I can bring something to it, we will. We'll dig into it a lot more in the near future. So I thank everybody for tuning in. Please share if you think you know somebody who might like my type of content and the way that I look at things. And I look forward to chatting with you all much more in the near future. So I'll see you all soon. Take care.